John, how are you, buddy?
Doing good, having a little coffee.
I'm having a coffee too in a snazzy little second passport mug, buddy. You like that?
I used to have one of those.
I know, but you broke it.
I know it was wild. It got wild around here. It was smashed in a gigantic party that we had.
Yeah. All right, let's dive in, buddy. I'd like to take a sip of this. So I'm going to introduce the topic, then you're going to start talking, and then you're going to watch me sip my coffee.
You got
So
it.
here's what we're going to talk about today. Ready, everybody? You ready? How can I get an LMIA? So if you don't know what an LMIA is, which I'm sure if you've been looking around the forums and looking around the internet, you probably know what this is, because I would say that this is one of the most common things that will come in, right? I want a job. How can I get an LMIA? Usually it starts off with, I want a job. Can you help me get a job? And then it goes into somebody who's been doing a little bit more research. How can I get an LMIA? Where do I get an LMIA? And all of that. So, and no, I'm not making fun or making light of this, but this is something you get a lot of these too, I'm sure, John.
Yeah. It's a big part of all the inquiries that I get.
Yeah, initial inquiries. A lot of people will make the rounds asking for that. So we're going to talk about how you can actually get an LMIA, what LMIAs are, how you can use them to leverage and why people want them to leverage for PR, and maybe some ideas about how you can actually get one of those, okay? Without paying somebody for it for a fake job, which I know you're not going to do, okay?
Right.
Because there's a market for that, and there's a lot of fraud in that, and there's a lot of people that lose a lot of money in that, okay? So let's dive in. John, what is an LMIA, buddy?
LMIA is an acronym which stands for Labor Market Impact Assessment. And that's a nice big fat bureaucratic term for what is essentially a piece of paper which Employment Services Development Canada, which is basically Canada's Ministry of Labor, gives to a Canadian employer that allows that a Canadian employer to hire a foreign national. It's permission to hire a foreign national. That's what it is in a nutshell.
And it's a process where they go through and they look at the labor market and the impacts of hiring a foreign worker. So they're looking at, like, what's the need for that? Wow, that was binging. What's
Right.
the need? What's the need for the worker, et cetera, et cetera. And I will correct John on one thing. He said it's a piece of paper. It's actually about 7 pages, to be honest.
Yeah, 7 pieces of paper.
7 pieces of paper, right? So sometimes it's funny, and I started off, we were talking about fraud. A lot of times people will say, here's your LMIA, and it's one sheet, and I'm like, that's not what it looks like, right? And the logo looks all off and everything. But anyways, so labor market impact assessment is the first stage to be able to hire a temporary foreign worker under the temporary foreign worker program, where the employer is getting authorization to be able to hire that foreign worker, and where the government, ESDC or Service Canada, is looking at the impacts of hiring that foreign worker on the Canadian job market and Canadians. All right. So now that we've established that, I don't want to talk about like high wage, low wage, and all the other mechanics of it. Let's keep this very high level with that, because it's how can I get one? So what's the next thing that we want to talk about there, John?
Well, in order to get an LMIA, let's make it clear, you, the foreign worker, cannot get an LMIA, right? Yes. That's another big thing I get. Dear Mr. John, Mr. Laroni, how can I get an LMIA? Well, you can't get one. You cannot get one. These are only given to Canadian employers, right? So, well, how can I get one via a Canadian employer? I guess would be the next question. Well, you need to have a job offer from a Canadian employer, and then a Canadian employer then applies for the LMIA and gets the LMIA. So the Canadian employer will give you the LMIA. You take that LMIA and you go and apply for permanent residence or a work permit or both.
Yeah, so it's the first part of the process in that respect. Okay, so.
But I guess the next question is, well, from that, how do I get a job in Canada, right? Wow. That's a bad.
Yeah,
That's
chicken and the egg. You take that one.
yeah. I'm gonna put a limit on my expertise there, folks, and say I don't know. You know, if you want to get a job in Canada, you have work experience and education in a certain industry or a certain service. You're going to know your industry best. You're probably going to have connections in Canada, and you're going to be your own best advocate for getting a job in Canada.
Come on, John, you're leaving them hanging there.
I know, but I
You're
don't want
leaving
to.
them hanging.
But I don't want to have a false sense of what I can do for clients. I mean, a lot of people, and unfortunately, this is something we see quite a lot of, is people say, "Oh, I can get you a job in Canada." Well, in order to be a recruiter in Canada, you have to be licensed, and you have to, you have to be. I think it might even be a regulated profession, as far as
In
I know.
some provinces, yes.
In some provinces,
And
so
especially when you're dealing with temporary foreign workers, other provinces have other things in place where protecting foreign workers. Can I jump? Can I cut you off like I sometimes
please
do?
do cut me off.
No, because I want to give some ideas. I want to let people understand a few things about this because again, what I tell people is they're like, well, how can I get a job? It's like, okay, well, there's a few different things you can do. First off, are you actually in need, right? Are you in a type of job that's needed? Okay. Because again, remember, it's all about protecting the Canadian job market for Canadians, not bringing in foreign workers or cheaper foreign workers where people are like, I've had people like, oh, you don't have to pay me, just give me a job. It's like, no, we it's not how it works. But what I'd say is this is if you're in demand, and I always use IT, for instance,
Yeah,
right?
very
IT
good.
workers, if you're at the top end of your spectrum, and especially with IT, like you're going to be able to get a job very easily because you're in demand. People want to hire you and employers will do that. But what you need to understand is this is a lot of times, first thing I'll do is I will have somebody call me up and they'll say, I have an employer that wants to hire me and do an LMIA. I'm like, great. Let me talk to that employer for 10
Yes.
minutes, right? Because a lot of things the employer's like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll sponsor you. It's okay. And they think like, oh, what do I have to write a letter? I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you're actually going to have to go through this process. You're going to have to pay an application fee. You're going to have to run all these could be very expensive advertisements. You're going to have to create all these charts to monitor those advertisements and report back. You're going to have to go through an interview with a government officer. You're going to have to release your financial documents and possibly letters from accountants and different things like that. And as soon as you mention, I don't know about you, John, but as soon as I mention about the financial documents, everyone's like, what do you mean? I got to give my financials to the government? I'm like, well, you're giving them to them anyways in terms of your T4s and everything. But yes, you actually have to give up that information. So sometimes, if you have that conversation with an employer and the employer is still gung ho, and so, a lot of employers are at that point, then sure, great, you're in. Like you're almost in, because then you're going to have to be able to satisfy the requirements of the LMIA. So,
Sorry, can I interject there? So no, you hit on a really important point. An employer has to be on board 100%, right, to go through this process.
Well, it's the employer's process.
It's the employer's process. So if the employer says no, you're dead in the water. Now, I don't want to be too negative here, and this is something maybe Brandon and I will do another day. But there's a whole world of exemptions, right?
Yeah.
You can you can apply for a work permit in Canada, and the employer does not have to apply for an LMIA. It's called an LMIA exemption. Now, again, I'm not going to get into that today, but safe to say that an LMIA is not always needed for you to get a work permit in Canada. There's quite a few exemptions there. There's also provincial nomination programs which are similar to an LMIA in that the employer has to provide some information, but I'm in British Columbia, and what the employer has to provide to the province of BC under their nomination program is far less than what they have to submit to the feds for an LMIA, right?
Yeah, John hit the nail on the head. LMIAs are not fun. They're not fun for the employer. They're definitely not fun for us. And they're not fun for anybody. And quite frankly, if I have another option outside of an LMIA, I will always take that option.
Yes.
And I think I am not alone in my industry. I know that we have some colleagues and all they do is LMIAs, and you know, God bless them, right? Like they're in that, and they are that's their job, and they're specialized in that, and good for them. I'm happy, and I'm I will do LMIAs under certain circumstances, but it's not something that's a mainstay for me because it's not fun.
Yeah.
With what John was saying though is that this is what you need to understand, and I'm going to diverge a little bit because I always like to talk about the strategy of it. You've got the temporary foreign worker program, and then you've got the IMP, which is the International Mobility Program. LMIA required, LMIA exempt. And again, I'm really kind of making that, I don't want to say dumbing it down, but that's a very simplified definition of it. There's a lot of different things that have to happen in there to be able to qualify. But again, if you can get around the LMIA process, or sometimes depending on the type of LMIA, there's certain exemptions that you can actually go through. That's amazing. The other thing I will tell you is that it's you got to look at the overall strategy to it too, right? Like if you're looking at this for PR, for instance, it gets a lot more complicated because then there's LMIAs and there's transition plans and things that need to happen in there, whether you're using it to support PR or not. And then if you're coming back again and it's supporting PR and you haven't done PR, you really have to have a strategy with this. If that is your actual something that is your goal or something that you might want to preserve as an option later. They're really great in terms of that. But a lot of people I find think that this is like the magic bullet, right?
Yeah.
And certain areas of the world, these are marketed just as that. And unfortunately, there's a lot of unscrupulous people, and I'm going to say it again, that will advertise, oh, pay me all this money and I'll get you a job offer. Please do not do that, because I will tell you this, and I know I sound like an old woman on this, right? And no offense to old women out there, my mother included, but I just it catches up. Like we've seen it over the years where, you'll go and you'll get this thing and then you're the one that's actually wearing all the liability to that. Right. So,
and also to add is that, we've seen it in the press here in Canada. There's been a lot of investigative journalists who've covered this, is that once you enter into that, the chances of you, the foreign worker, being further exploited by the sort of ecosystem surrounding it is really high. You hear terrible stories of people who bought an LMIA and they come to Canada and they get their work permit and they go to the restaurant or the furniture manufacturing place and they get the tap on the shoulder from the boss saying, you're supposed to be getting paid $25 an hour. Well, at the end of the month, you're to give back $20 in cash. Otherwise, we're gonna pull the plug on you and we're gonna fire you and you're gonna have to go home. I mean, I don't ever really like to sound too negative in our videos together. This is something that people really have to understand, that you're entering into what could be a world of hurt, right?
You're paying somebody to break the law where you're actually holding all of the liability.
Yeah.
And
that's a really good way of putting it.
And that person could be overseas and they're out of the long arm of the law, so to speak. And you're the one that's going to do that. And, sometimes you'll see people and they'll get on and over the years, they'll get on and they'll be like, oh, I'm the victim and I was exploited. Yeah, maybe, but I've seen a number of things where people are totally complicit in that. And you have to understand that too, is that you can't play the victim card later on because the investigations go a little differently. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know why we got into that thing, but I always like to talk about it because I would say this is the number one area of fraud in the immigration thing. And I have no stats to back that up, but I would say that this is, when I see people, man, I got some jackass over in Mumbai right now pretending that he works for me and he's selling LMIAs to people. right?
I have a guy on Instagram who's partially stolen my identity, and he's doing the same thing.
Yeah, and I get people calling me up, and they're paying, they're paying 2 lakhs for that right now, which is a lot of money. And
but without going too far down the horror story rabbit hole,
I'm sorry.
It's okay. I'm guilty of it too. But safe to say though, guys, if you have a job offer in Canada, your employer is on side, there's a solution there for you. Whether it be an LMIA, whether it be an exemption under an LMIA, or even a provincial nomination program or something else, there's a solution there for you. But again, the key is to have an employer willing to go through the process.
Thanks for bringing me back there, John. I don't know. There must be something in my coffee, a little bit of fire in there for me, because I was like, yeah, I was going there. But anyways,
no, I get it. It's frustrating because nobody likes to see good people exploited, and it is a problem.
No, I feel I've seen some horrible stuff, and that's why. And again, see, I'm starting to verge back there. But people will literally call me up and be like, "Hey, this guy says he works for." I'm like, I have no idea who you are, who he is. Have you paid him money? No, but he's asking for this. I'm like, don't pay him a cent. Don't pay him a rupee. Don't pay him a drachma. Don't pay him anything, right? And that's for everybody. Anyways, listen. How can you get an LMIA? If you're in demand, you can find an employer that will, and you're in demand and the market's in demand for you, you stand a pretty good chance. Yes, this can actually set you apart and be the difference for you, not only to get here and work temporarily, but it also can be the difference for you to be able to, immigrate to Canada and do all of that. On top of that, it's not the only thing that you should be looking at. You need to have a cohesive strategy. And again, I'm going to say it again because I think this is the one thing that people fail to plan for. I see it a lot with like students, for instance, workers, not as much, but students, like the idea is I'll just get to Canada and I'm fine. It's like, no, it's not. You have so many little steps, but you need to know when John and I do our stuff, we know what the end goal is. And that's the first thing I ask people is, what do you want to do? Where's your end? It's right here. Okay, well, let's work back and find out what the best way to get you there is. Any last words, John? Because I'm going to stop now.
Any last words, Mr. Laroni? No, you've hit the nail on the head as usual.
I've hit something on the head, that's for sure. Anyways, mate, I'm going to let you go. It's been fun. It's always fun. Good. It's always fun. Thanks, guys, for watching. And John, I'll see you later, buddy.
Everybody, have a good weekend. And we'll talk to you all soon.
Okay, take care, man. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.